Firstly, a bit of background about me. I've been a caver for over 15 years. I'm a team medic for cave rescue, a firefighter, and also a specialist paramedic for the UK Hazardous Area Response Team, also known as HART. I have a wealth of experience and knowledge, and in no way a novice to the underground environment. Last Saturday, we went into a fairly dangerous, unstable mine. The mine is on a horizontal level and is a deep adit. The mine was recently reopened after around 100 years and is known for its collapses in very unstable, dangerous areas. We were fully equipped with all of the relevant equipment for a standard walk-in and out trip, not requiring any rope access. We had a really good trip into the mine. We had a look at specific hazards and some pretty minerals. On the way out, we were passing through chest-deep water for about 300 meters and had to pass under a horrible bit of timber work holding the entire world up above our heads. The other 5, also either paramedics or cave rescue, went first one by one, which is the best practice when moving through dangerous bits of mines. I was at the end of the line and just about to take my turn when absolute fear really did strike. I was stood perfectly still watching my best friend turn away from me to pass under the timbers of the collapsed stope above when the ground suddenly disappeared from under me. No warning and no slight movement, just boom. The next thing that happened was I was stuck in a chest-deep hole under 4 feet of water with hundreds of thousands of gallons forcing me down as it rushed through the hole that I was stuck in. My chest was crushed, forcing all of the air from my lungs and causing extreme panic to now set in. From above, all anyone could see was a rushing, swirling pool draining the above passageways rapidly. All 5 were convinced that I was dead, and due to the hole, couldn't get anywhere near me. After what felt like forever, I suddenly felt like I was falling, but still in water and was still unable to breathe. What happened was that the floor and ceiling of the expanse fully below collapsed into a hidden stope. This caused me to fall around 30 feet, landing on my neck, then shoulder, and then my chest, before then being pushed down a deep flooded winze, which is a mine shaft that doesn't go to the surface. At this point, I knew that I was too deep to be able to swim back as I was being sucked down the shaft by the rapid waterfall from above. At some point, I took a small breath in of water, which was agony, and my foot was caught onto something. I kicked my foot back and pushed as hard as I could at what I hoped was the correct way up, and not launching myself further into the dark abyss. At this point, I felt scared, panicked, and just desperate not to die. I remember the feeling of being desperately sad that I'd never see my children again, and a really painful emotion flooded over me, and I knew that I had to take this last breath of water. This last breath of water would cause me to drown, and that was it. Game over. As I took the involuntary breath in, fully aware that it was my last, I realized there was air mixed in with the water, which made me choke and splutter. I then gasped again, and I realized I was in a chamber. I scrambled to the side and looked up. The roof was collapsing further, and the water was flooding the space rapidly. I was around 20 to 30 meters under the floor that I was previously standing on. I took stock of the kit I had and threw a space blanket over me. Once the water began subsiding, I looked up, and to my huge relief, I could see a headlamp. I took my helmet off and shined a light at myself to give a thumbs up. At this point, both myself and my best friend had a little tear of joy and relief. However, quickly recognizing I was still in mortal danger, they then got a plan in place. 3 were sent to the cars to collect ropes and kit. The other 2 jumped the hole and made rapid progress to the end of the mine to collect an old scaffolding barrier that, when turned upright, looked like a ladder. Now, this bit of metal is very heavy. The 2 left, both fellow cave rescue team members, linked 5 caving belts together and lowered the ladder into the void. With massive hesitation, but realizing this was my one chance, I re-entered the water that had nearly killed me just minutes before. I swam out to the bottom and managed to traverse, and then crumbly climbed to jump the ladder and pull myself up. At this point, it was really a do or die kind of moment. Once my weight was on the ladder, The belts began digging through the floor, causing more collapse from the ceiling onto me, but also pulling the edge of the hole and floor closer to my friends that were rescuing me. Once at the top of the ladder, I was still a good 6 feet below the hole, so I had to stand on the top round and held a belt with one hand, at which point the ladder spun from under my feet, leaving me suspended yet again. I managed to kick out and find a small fault in the rock, and I just pushed as hard as I could, causing the leaning wall to start collapsing, causing a loud rumbling noise. My head and shoulders were above the lip, but I struggled as the lip of the hole was just thick with slimy mud. Kicking back, I managed to level my body and roll over. This was it. It was enough to get up and out of the hole. This took around 30 minutes in total from the ground opening to me being back above the hole. This was the most scared I've ever been, and I absolutely knew I was going to die, but thank God I survived. I work as a child care professional, and one of the kids that I look after recently got into hiking. I decided to take him to a really cool trail in Salt Fork State Park. We were all set to hike to Hozak's Cave after parking right near the beginning of the trailhead. The trail was about a half a mile, which is why I chose this trail for our hike that day. I also chose this trail because anytime that I had been on it before, it was very busy and full of other people, and a very popular spot which made me feel secure. However, this past summer we had a cluster of severe summer storms which caused massive damage to the trail. So to my surprise, it was much more difficult and completely empty. Now, I wasn't bothered by the trail being obviously empty because there was a small construction crew working on a bridge that was just barely visible from the trailhead. He was still up for the hike despite the entire width of the trail being washed out until it was no more than a foot wide, with a 6 to 12 foot drop off into a creek bed that is solid rock and several trees down. He's very athletic, and I was confident in his abilities, and he was so excited to tackle our adventure. We made it all the way to a platform that allows you to see the entire cave. There were many down trees surrounding the platform, and it was actually closed at this point. But we had made it this far, so we decided to maneuver around the platform and proceeded a few hundred feet into the cave. We spent the most time in this area due to the difficulty, so I know exactly what it looked like. There were tree roots directly under the platform, and you could climb down either side of them. It's also worth noting that Hozak's Cave is much more like a cliff, with an overhanging rock formation and a trickle of waterfall directly in the middle. It's not a creepy closed-up cave. It's very open and beautiful. We got into the cave, and I noticed a candle that was not burning recently but had been at some point sitting on a large rock that had a heart carved into it. I chalked it up to someone just having a date or something, and just disregarded it. He wanted to climb to the top, where I noticed 2 more candles and 3 stacks of small rocks that had been stacked up by somebody. I definitely felt weird at this point, but it was about this time that he had found a small puddle full of baby salamanders, and he wanted to catch them. It was the happiest that I'd seen him in a very long time, and I didn't really have the heart to tell him that it was time to go. We spent about an hour catching baby salamanders, and I watched him have the time of his life. Well, we had finally decided to leave, and when we got to the platform, dead center in the middle of the tree roots was a wet washcloth hanging that was absolutely not there before. He noticed it as well, but he didn't pick up on the severity of the situation we were in. At that moment, I factually knew 2 things. 1, someone was watching us and we didn't see them. And 2, they were now potentially hiding in the woods and made it a point to not be seen but to leave an object to be noticed. There was no running back with the narrow trail, and I wasn't about to tell him that we were in potential danger. I told him to go in front of me, and I just kept encouraging him that he was doing great over and over, and that seemed to speed him up naturally. I never saw anyone while we were on the trail. When we got to the car, I locked the doors immediately. On our way out of the park, a very dirty man, probably in his 30s, came out of the woods and made it a point to stare at me with the most empty of expressions that I've ever seen. The man followed me with his eyes and head as I drove by him and continued to stare at me until I couldn't see him anymore. I knew the third fact at that point. He made it a point to make himself apparent to me, and that facts 1 and 2 were true. That stare stuck with me for days, and I considered counseling after this, as it really bothered me for several weeks, causing me severe anxiety. I tried to just tell myself that maybe we just interrupted his bath time and he was camping and just didn't want to startle us. After all, the crazy-looking man had ample time to do anything that he wanted while we were catching salamanders. I just cannot in any way rationalize why he stared into my eyes the way he did if he wanted to go unnoticed. Deep down, I know that it is much more likely that it was a deliberate action intended to scare me. The kid that was with me never had any idea how panicked I was, and to this day, it's the most fun that I've ever seen him have. He brings it up regularly, and it was a very positive experience for him. However, it was one of my worst experiences ever, and it made me feel so sick and disturbed. For some background, I'm a 20-something female from the UK. When I was 15, I had my first girlfriend, and looking back, there were many red flags, but I was young and naive. She put me in a few creepy situations that I've never told anyone, until now. We lived in a quiet rural town, and we used to go on walks through a forested area right by our house that you could access from a little side path. People would sometimes walk their dogs along there, but this was rare and it was mostly secluded and eerie. As you walked further in, the path got hilly, so eventually you reached a point where you were high up and you had a stream of water below you, and it was very unsteady. If you picture something like a cliff, that was how it looked. Now, it must be said that I really hated this forested area. I appreciate nature, but the seclusion and darkness of it just creeped me out. Something about it just made my skin crawl. My girlfriend knew this, but she insisted that we walk there anyway because she wanted to smoke without her parents knowing. Plus, she made me feel guilty about not wanting to go along this path, reminding me that we needed to spend time together, and that if I didn't come, I couldn't spend time with her. I reluctantly went with her, although I couldn't shake the creepy feeling that it gave me. One afternoon as we were walking along, she insisted on going up the hilly sections as far as we could go. I felt very uncomfortable, but I didn't want her to think I was a wimp, so I carried on walking with her. Despite the time of day, the trees were so tall that it felt like it was night. It was dark and there were no sounds of civilization. You couldn't even hear birds. Only the sounds of twigs breaking and the stream gushing as we got closer. Once we reached the top, my girlfriend motioned for me to sit on some of the old tree stumps, which I did. We were chatting like we usually did. She was holding my hand and smoking her cigarette. However, she seemed a bit quieter than usual, and she was nodding her head in response to me more than she was actually speaking to me. I thought it was unlike her, but I didn't question her on it. After a while, she stood up and walked over to the stream and looked down. I watched her, kind of confused. She had her back to me, before she then turned around and started to tell me that she had made a den for herself down in the stream. I was baffled by this. She never came up here without me as far as I knew, and it wasn't possible to get down there without serious injury. If you jumped off from the top, it would be very easy to break a bone, or worse. You couldn't reach the part of the stream we were at by taking a different path, because no matter how you walked, all the pathways led to a tall height above the stream. I voiced this, but she just came closer to me, beckoning me to come to the edge with her and look over. I hesitated. Something felt really off about it, and I was already really uncomfortable being in the forest because I hated this area already. I stood up but stayed in place, and I shook my head, making a face and saying something about how you couldn't have a den down there and you'd die if you tried to make one, and that I didn't want to stay here any longer. She seemed unfazed by this, and she kept telling me that she'd been coming down here on her own for weeks, and she told me again that she'd found a way to climb down without getting hurt, and that there happened to be a cave that you couldn't see unless you climbed right down, and that inside she had made herself a den. Again, this just didn't make any sense to me, and I then realized I was starting to feel afraid. Maybe it was just me being dramatic, but in that moment, she really was starting to creep me out. I knew that she was lying. I can't stress enough how impossible it would be for her to have made a den down there. But still, I stayed standing there, and so did she. She beckoned me forward yet again, and I decided to appease her a little by craning my neck. She then told me, "Just come over, stand right next to me." Now, I wasn't thinking in my head that she was some crazed murderer who was going to hurt me, but I did feel uneasy. Still, I stupidly decided to walk over just a little and take a look. Keeping my distance, I peeked over a little. I just saw rushing water and a lot of what I'd call bushes, but nothing out of place. While I was looking, I could see my girlfriend in my peripheral vision. She was just staring at me, smiling like I'd never seen her smile before. I turned to face her and took a few steps back to get from the edge again. "It's just water," I told her, and she turned to stare down again. Then she started telling me to climb down and she'd show me her den. I refused. Again, I wasn't thinking she was trying to hurt me, but something about it all just felt off, wrong. She kept insisting that I just climb down, that it was easy and she would come down after me, and then we could chill out in her den. I tried to keep it light to hide my unease, so I said something about how if we got down there, we probably wouldn't be able to get back up again. She told me that she'd been down lots of times and you could get back up, and that it was worth it. I knew in my gut something was off about this, so I told her no and I said I wanted to go home. I then backed away a little, and I told her if she wanted to go down she could, but I wasn't sticking around to join her. Something about the defiance in my voice must have made her give up, because she huffled at me before grabbing my hand and pulling me along with her back the way we came and out of the forest. She never mentioned it again, and maybe it sounds like I was being dramatic for no reason, but I knew in my gut that something was wrong. I don't know what her intentions were, if she was trying to spook me with some weird prank, but it was one of the creepiest experiences I've ever had. I'm not saying she was trying to murder me or anything, but again, I can't stress enough how impossible it would have been to make a den down there. We eventually split up because she was so toxic, and since then I've heard nothing but bad news about her. Always listen to your gut, guys. It's never wrong. This happened 3 years ago today on the dot. So, a bit of background. I may have been stalked and chased out of camp by a possible escaped convict after finding a cave and trying to look inside. This all went down during the spring break of my junior year of high school. My school was in a pretty small Iowa town with a district spanning several smaller hamlets. During the summer of 2014, a few friends of mine put together a film club that would make short films and compete in national film festivals against other schools. We were a pretty small group and found it kind of difficult to get together for any actual filming until spring break of 2015 when we made plans for a little excursion. 4 of us ended up going on the trip. Myself and 3 members of the club, let's call them Jake, Bill, and Kyle. We ended up choosing to go camping out at Mossy Glen Hollow, a supposedly haunted state park up in the northeastern Iowa. Since the 1850s, there have been several murders and suicides out at Mossy Glen, including a few decapitations and a hired hitman in the 1930s. Now, being the edgy teens that we were, we jumped at the chance to go hiking and camping somewhere like that. It was within 15 minutes of a small town as well, so stocking up on food wouldn't be that big of an issue either. So all lights green, we loaded up 2 of our sedans, programmed the GPS, and off we went for a spring break camping in some haunted woods. After the first hour and a half on the road, a few red flags began to fly. After the last large town before getting way out in the boondocks, my phone's data signal cut out and the GPS randomly changed directions on us. Since none of us had any idea where the hell we were at or where Mossy Glen was supposed to be, We didn't have much of a choice but to just blindly follow the new route. To save on continuity, I'm going to throw this section at the end. It's not really important to the story, but can give a bit of perspective on how places like Mossy Glen end up in the legal state that this place was in. Once we were firmly in the middle of nowhere, our GPS took us off the paved highways and onto the gravel roads. At this point, you would typically see the usual brown Iowa DNR signs designating that you were near a state park, but there were none. There weren't even any tree clumps to indicate that you were near some sort of forest. Red flag number 2. Another 10 or so minutes into the drive, and the gravel road soon turns into a dirt road, then a low maintenance road, then a Class B minimum maintenance road. With Iowa's dedication to road preservation, this basically means that somebody probably came by and took a peek in the 90s and then probably forgot all about its existence. As we come around the last hilly bend that the GPS shows on our route, we see a farmhouse with a large machine shed with no lights or activity around either, and no cars in the driveway. A bit weirded out that a house would be right next to a state park, we slow down and keep rolling. To our dismay, however, the road dissolves into a mess of washed tractor tire gouges from last fall's harvest. We stop the cars as far down as we can pass without getting hung up on a frozen rut and unpack some of our equipment. The road gradually narrows, snakes down the middle of a field, and turns down into the very small but very thick clump of woods at the bottom of a wide ravine. We get out and hike down the gradually steepening slope and take in the scenery. At first, everything looks like a pretty damn cool set to film at. There are several limestone outcrops hanging off of the hillside, a footpath with some picturesque tree overhang, and even a few birds out that made an unseasonal return from wintering down south. We can all hear some water running, but we can't identify a source from the trail. Looking off in any direction, all we could see was a seemingly endless sea of trees. At the bottom of the hill was a small pond in the middle of a grassy clearing with a fence. As we approached the fence, we noticed a sign. Private property. Keep out. Bill checks his watch and realizes that it's almost time for dinner, so we trek back to our vehicles and hook up the GPS. The nearest town over was a little place called Edgewood that had several diners as well as a gas station to load up on supplies for the next week. We brought some canned food, but not much beyond that. As we got to town, we realized that Edgewood was a lot smaller than we had expected. Less than 900 people it would turn out. Everyone knows everyone in these small towns, so we got several weird looks when 4 strangers rolled up with plates from the other side of the state. Kyle thought to ask the cashier and a few people at the gas station about Mossy Glen Hollow and why the only route in was through some dude's field on a busted out dirt road. To our surprise, nobody had even heard of a place called Mossy Glen, nor could they figure out why the hell 4 high schoolers suddenly rolled into town looking for the place. Red flag number 3. We shrug it off as just a few crazy locals and take off back down the dirt trail. As we round the corner back near the farmhouse, we notice that all lights are still off and nobody seems to be home. I suggest that we leave some sort of note on the house door that we're going to be parking on the side of the road near their place just to be safe. It's starting to get late in the day, and being this far out in the country, it wouldn't be unheard of to come face to face with a shotgun when the homeowners find our cars. Since the road is impassable from that point on anyway, parking there wouldn't realistically block anybody off of the road and would still technically be on public land. We hike back down the wooded trail and start scouting for a place to set up camp for the night. Making sure to be on the public side of the fence pond area, we discover that the sea of trees that we saw earlier was actually quite a bit thinner when seen from below. In fact, the dirt path led to a decently sized clearing with a creek and a small waterfall cutting through the limestone deposits. None of us could believe that we had missed such a thing a few hours earlier when Bill came to a realization. He disappears around the corner back into the trees and then emerges at the top of the trail a few minutes later. Though we could plainly see him, the trees lined up just right so that you couldn't see anything beyond the rocks below the path ledge. Continuing further up the creek, We notice that there are conveniently placed rocks about the perfect distance apart to step without disturbing the water or surrounding rocks. One could walk almost silently up and down the creek while the sound of the water masked the steps. Not thinking much of it, we took some pictures of the large moss-covered boulders all around and got some pretty nice scenic shots. We find a place to make camp, and everything's going great, until we approach the waterfall. Just before the waterfall set a clearing without any large boulders or rocks, as well as an odd arrangement of logs. One sat horizontal, supported at each end by 2 piles of rocks. In front sat a crude stone circle with a pile of burnt logs inside. A fire pit with a bench. Though a bit surprised at first, we shrug it off as some weekend project that the people up at the house put together. After all, with such a cool place just a short walk from home, why not? I have a similar fire pit set up at home, so I'm not too concerned. "Hey, what the hell's this?" Kyle yells from a boulder a few yards ahead. On it sat a blaze orange beanie, a single gardening glove, an empty can of beer, and a stick of deodorant that has seen some serious wear. Looking closer at the beer can, we realize that it must have been opened fairly recently. Foam is still fresh in the bottom of the can, and it still had a funny smell. Bewildered by what the hell we just found, Jake starts looking around the other side of the boulders upstream of the items. "Holy crap, guys, there's a cave over here!" he shouts back to us. Later on, he told us that the cave was large enough to comfortably fit a person inside of it. And then more disturbingly, he saw some red fabric inside as well. Before he can get a good look around, Kyle calls the 3 of us back over to him with a sense of urgency. He speaks very quietly to us and then indicates that we shouldn't shout back. "Shampoo. Freaking shampoo, dude," he whispers, pointing urgently down at his feet. Sure enough, in the mud and leaves, there's a blue bottle of Suave shampoo right next to the creek. At this point, we're all adequately freaked the hell out and ready to call our little soiree quits. Bill remains pretty sure that this is just junk left behind by the people up at the house after a weekend of way too many beers, but things just didn't add up to me. There's one detail that I've been leaving out up until this point. The day before, this part of Iowa got some really heavy rain, which contributed to the mud situation on the road and on the trail. With the combination of wind and rain, the items on the rocks would have shown some serious signs of being wet if not being displaced entirely. Also, the air was pretty cold, as it is every year around this time, not getting above the mid-40s for the whole week. Then everything starts to click for me. Whoever drank the beer and left the shampoo, hat, glove, and deodorant and shampoo down there must have done so sometime this morning. The fire pit also had fresh char marks on the rocks, and the wood had not been wet for a while, meaning that it must have been lit last night at the earliest. The small cave would have provided enough shelter from the rain to stay dry. With the freezing temps all throughout the day, whoever was using shampoo out here must have had little other choice to do so. If it was the homeowners, they would have had to be serious masochists to bathe in the shallow, freezing rocky creek rather than at home. And if it wasn't them, then we likely weren't alone right now. Whoever left these things out left in a hurry, and if they were here 4 hours ago, they would have been able to see us on the trail cliff long before we even knew they were down here. Remembering the arrangement of rocks on the stream, they could have even been leaving their camp just as we were coming down the dirt trail. As I processed this, I started to look around at my surroundings, and I realized that the small area was bordered by the thick trees on the trail side, several sets of huge boulders on the pond side, and limestone cliffs everywhere else. Due to the tree, rock, and hill cover, you could light a fire in the pit at night, and nobody around you would ever know. The illusion of being able to see up the dirt trail from the camp but not down played in reverse from the cliffs. If you were wearing brown or green, you could easily see down from the rocks on top of the camp below while blending in with the trees above. Coming to these realizations, I noticed something else, something more sinister. The birds and small animals that we previously heard are now quiet. Aside from the soft babble of the creek, The entire place is completely silent. As I start to explain this to the rest of the group, I see the wheels turning in their heads as well. Jake starts to head back to the small cave when a rustling up on the limestone ridgeline catches our attention. Something large was shifting around up there, something that apparently didn't want Jake to see what was in that cave. We all look up, and whatever or whoever made the noise starts shuffling down the ridge toward the makeshift camp. Because of the high cliff, the only way down to us would be by going all the way back down to the pond and then double back up the stream. Realizing this and almost crapping ourselves at how open we were, we book it back up the stream, up the dirt path, across the field and back to our cars. On the drive back to Edgewood, we all try to process what the hell just happened back there. I took a look at a satellite map, and the really only accessible way to the cliff where we heard the noise would be to walk up there from the pond. It was too craggy to approach from the adjacent field to the east. Whatever made that noise would have to be large too, and a deer getting up there wouldn't necessarily be out of the question. It would have had some incredible timing to have started moving around just as Jake started looking at the cave and whatever red fabric was inside of it. Kyle found a report of an escaped convict from a local prison a few weeks ago, and he was convinced that it was his camp that we found, though we were all doubtful at best of his idea. To satisfy his concerns, we agreed to report the strange things we found to the police anonymously, since we all really wanted to get home at this point. None of us followed up on them though, and I really doubt anything ever came of it. A small close-knit town police department gets a report of strange sightings from strangers the same day that 4 high schoolers roll up and park outside a farmer's house for a few hours and then book it out doesn't exactly spell high-threat criminal activity to me. Still, things just don't add up. Whoever came running down that cliff wanted to keep whatever was inside that cave hidden, but not enough to actually fight 4 decently tall and able teenagers. We figured that he just wanted to scare us off, since the noises seemed to stop once we reached the dirt path. I thought it was odd that someone living out in the woods with seemingly something to hide would set up shop in a state park. That is, until I checked my GPS again. That little reroute that it took us on was an old entrance to the park that had been cut off by the purchase of the lake area sometime between the map records used for Google's navigation being updated and on that very day. The current entrance to the park is about 2 miles north of where the GPS sent us, thinking it found a faster route. The place we were at was still public land for sure, but not quite what we pictured. So yeah, to the dude in Mossy Glen Hollow, I don't know who you were, but I'm really glad we didn't see you face to face. I hope you all enjoyed this story, and please everyone, stay safe. I go caving with my dad, who grew up mining uranium until his family's mine went belly up. He's pretty used to enclosed spaces and being underground, and I was raised similarly, albeit without the radon gas. I rappelled into pits I can't see the bottom of, bouldered my way along and over one of the largest underwater rivers in North America, nearly caught in a flash flood, and slipped into a crevice whose bottom is as of today not mapped and has never been reached or documented by anyone. It was by far the scariest damn thing to ever happen to me. I had to brace myself with my feet, back against one wall and legs stretched out in front of me, arms on either side. I was in a pretty good spot to be, roughly 10 feet down, on wet smooth rock, and my headlamp came unplugged from its battery in my pack, meaning I only had the light from my dad looking down on me 10 feet up to see by. He had to leave to get rope, and I couldn't really go anywhere or reattach my lamp to my position, so I got to chill in that crevice for roughly an hour. But God, it felt like so much longer. I thought the fall itself was scary, but it was nothing compared to that. Complete darkness, and it was so quiet. I could hear my blood rushing in my ears, could hear my knees creaking under the pressure. Every piece of gravel that came loose from the tread of my boots hitting the sides of the crevice on the way down, just fading out. I started seeing lights and little flashes, and I couldn't tell if my eyes were opened or closed. I also couldn't move to check. or I'd fall God knows how far. I could hear more than I ever wanted while simultaneously experiencing the most quiet I'd ever felt, and all I could feel was the rock against my back and hands, and presumably what my feet were braced against. I started to not be able to tell up from down, started hearing footsteps and seeing movement in shapes from the corner of my eyes. It was utter hell waiting for my dad to come back with the rope to help me back out. I know what I experienced was just due to lack of visual and auditory stimuli, but damn, it was the scariest thing I've ever experienced, and we always bring a good amount of rope with us now, even if we think we won't need it in a cave. I've been caving as a hobby for several years now. Nothing really creepy ever happens while caving, but I've been in some dangerous situations which have left me questioning my sanity or the sanity of those around me. So I used to cave with a gang of people from a university club, but I had been out of university a few years now and been doing my own thing. Well, one weekend, me and my friend, let's call her Jane, decided we should go on a little trip to a cave with these guys, to see how the old club was doing. The club that taught us how to cave, and we in turn taught the new guys when we were the oldies. So anyway, it's going okay, and me and Jane go off caving on our own. But that evening, we decided to join the group and cave with them in a cave near the campsite. Now, it was raining a bit, and I was starting to feel uneasy, but to be honest, I never voiced my concerns and just went with it. A large group of about 10 people get to this cave. The cave is basically a river on the inside normally, but it has a few levels of corridors that you can explore high above the river. The entrance is super tight though, and requires you to climb down this tight pipe using your feet to feel for footholds. There's no way to see what is below you, and basically if you lose your footing, there's a nasty fall of about 3 meters, but keep your head on and it's fine. Well anyway, we get to the cave and the guys in the club are doing their thing. Jane and I are just the old dudes coming along for old times. We get into the cave, and there's one girl who gets stuck there in the entrance at the end of the group. Well, turns out it was her second cave ever, and they brought her into this one even though she was panicked in a much larger cave earlier that day. 2 of the leaders stay behind to help her calm down and get her into the cave, and the rest of us potter on, down some of the long corridors and start exploring the cave. Then I asked the leader of the group, a girl who I thought knew how to cave, let's call her dick shit, what time it is. She tells me that she doesn't have a watch. I ask her how does she know what time to leave the cave at to be on time for the call out. Now, a call out is arguably the most important thing about caving. It's where you let someone on the surface, even your buddy who you ring, know that you and whoever else are going to this cave and will be out at this specific time. Without a call out, no one will know you were missing for days and have hundreds of caves to check. Anyway, the leader of all these innocent sweet beginners tells me that she did not leave a call out, that or bring any first aid kit or safety equipment. I hold my cool because I don't want the others to panic, but I tell her quietly I am now the call out, be out of the cave at this time. I give her my watch and start back towards the entrance. At the entrance, the 2 other leaders are sitting with the girl who got stuck earlier, and they managed to get her into the cave and are now sitting with her. I tell them the situation, and I tell them that I'm leaving the cave. They ask me to go get an SRT kit, basically ropes and a harness, and it's in case the panicked girl needs to climb back up, so I do just that. A little while later, I come back with the gear, which they didn't all have, and I had to borrow off other cavers who are luckily at the same campsite. Well, I get back to the cave and the others are leaving. Slowly, mind you, as it's a difficult entrance and climbing out is even harder. They all manage to get out, but lo and behold, the panicked girl gets stuck, and with 2 leaders trapped below her, she's blocking the entrance. We harness her up and I rig up an anchor to try and secure her on a rope in case she falls, but she's wedged tight. Then I get the news from the others below that the cave is starting to fill. This was due to rain. After what seems like an eternity of them nicely talking to this panicked girl, telling her that she's doing great and she'll be fine, I freak out. I shouted at her that she needs to get her shit together and get out of the cave because 2 others are stuck behind her. It kind of works, and she nearly stops having a panic attack. Not entirely, but stops hyperventilating, which just makes her more stuck. She still won't climb out though, so against all common sense, I lie down into the hole and grab her by the harness and then pull her up and out of the cave. After that, I told the club that they need to get their crap together and stop being cowboys, but I haven't gone back to them since. Hey everyone, that's about it for today's stories. If you have your own story that you would like to send, you can send it in at southerncannibal.com, or you can email it at southerncannibalstories@gmail.com. I look forward to telling your story. Have a good night or good day, everyone. And remember to always stay